Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Innistrad Midnight Hunt spoilers, and today, it's the final day of spoiler season, for the main set at least. We just got the full set, so we got everything to talk about. A lot of times the last day of spoiler season, we just got a handful of comments, but this time it's different. We have a ton of cards to talk about, which means we should probably jump right into it. But before we do, a couple of quick reminders. One, if you want to see the full set, we got it up over at MTGpreviews.com. You can sort it, filter it, all that good stuff, so check that out. Two, even though we're at the end of main set spoilers, we still have Commander Precon spoilers on Monday. I'll make a video about those over on the MTGGoldfish Commander YouTube channel, and even though we're done with spoilers, there's still a lot of Innistrad to come. We got top 10 lists, we're gonna have gameplay content, so look out for some of these sweet cards in action in the near future on the YouTube channel and in the stream. And finally, if you need some of these cards, or you just need to pre-order the set in general, you can snag it from our sponsor, Card Kingdom. They got it up for pre-sale now, along with basically any other Magic card you could need. You can even get a free MTG Goldfish sticker. Let them know you want one, they'll hook you up. So anyway, let's talk the rest of our sweet new Innistrad Midnight Hunt cards. First up today, we got our final adversary, our green adversary, Primal Adversary. So 3 mana, 4/3 wolf. With trample, when it enters the battlefield, you can pay 1 in a green any number of times. For each time you pay, you put a +1/+1 counter on it and turn that many lands into 3/3 wolf creatures with haste, and they're still lands. So Primal Adversary, the card is definitely powerful, but it kind of surprised me because the whole rest of the cycle is 2 mana. Obviously, we don't want a 2 mana 4/3, that would be kind of ridiculous, but I was expecting like a 2 mana 3/2 or 3/3 maybe with a somewhat similar ability. So it's a little weird that this is the only member of the cycle that doesn't cost 2 mana. However, even with that considered, Primal Adversary is a pretty good card when you think about it. So for 3 mana, you get a 4/3 trample, which is not like super busted, but that's a fine base rate. And then if you get up to 5 mana, you get a 4/3 with trample that gets a +1/+1 counter. So technically a 5/4 with trample that comes along with a 3/3 wolf. Little awkward, you got to turn your lands into a wolf. You could get your lands killed. The other thing that's really interesting about how this scales is it scales even a little better than you think, because let's say you get up to 6 mana. Normally that would kind of be wasted. You don't have enough to pay the kicker cost or pseudo kicker cost in extra time, but with Primal Adversary, you still get benefit. Let's say you get up to 6 mana, you cast it, you kick it once or pseudo kick it once, you get the counter on it and you get the land, but you can target an untapped land. So at 6 mana, you get a 5/4 trample and also a 3/3 hasty land. That's kind of like a legit clock. That's a lot of damage coming across. So I think that Primal Adversary, even though the mana cost is different, is a very powerful card. The ability to turn lands into 3/3s, a little bit reminiscent of Nissa Who Shakes the World, and Nissa is what makes me not super worried about this ability. Normally I'd be scared, okay, I'm going to turn my lands into creatures and then get wrathed and I lose my creatures and I lose a bunch of lands, but Nissa was a pretty good card, and I think that by the time you're kicking or pseudo kicking Primal Adversary and you got 5, 6 mana, 7, 8 mana, then losing a land isn't the end of the world anyway. So I think that even with that drawback, Primal Adversary is pretty good. It compares to a few other cards. I mean, maybe the easiest comparison is Regisaur Alpha. Regisaur Alpha, though, makes me wonder how good Primal Adversary really is. Regisaur Alpha, 5 mana 4/4 that gives all your other dinosaurs haste and makes a 3/3 dinosaur which has haste. So for 5 mana, you get a 4/4 and a 3/3 haste. Primal Adversary, for this same mana cost, you're getting a 5/4, so a little more power on the front side. It's getting trample, which is an upside, but your hasty land is going to be tapped down because you're not going to have an untapped land available. So it's, I think, roughly comparable to Regisaur Alpha, except there's some huge upsides here. Other comparisons like Tovolar, 6 mana, you get a 6/6 into 2/2 wolves. Trostani Summoner, you get up to 7 mana, it puts 10 power on the board. Primal Adversary compares favorably to that. The big upside of Primal Adversary, though, is it's an on-curve 3-drop. All these other cards, they're expensive. Regisaur Alpha, on turn 3, doing nothing. Tovolar Huntmaster on turn 5, doing nothing. Trostani Summoner on turn 6, doing nothing. Primal Adversary has the upside that on turn 3, it's fine. In a world without Lovestruck Beast, a 3 mana 4/3 with Trample. That's a fine card. It's a Garruk's Harbinger. It's Bone Crusher Giant stats. We've seen these stats be very playable and constructed, and without Lovestruck pieced around to block all of your 4/3s, it gets even better. So you have this flexibility where on turn 3, it's a fine creature. On turn 5, it's a good creature. On turn 6, it gets even a little better because your land has haste. You get up to 7 mana and you're turning on 2 lands, and then all of a sudden you got a 6/5 that's making 2 3/3s. That's kind of absurd. So it adds so much power to the battlefield, and it starts at a relatively solid base. So the only question I have for Primal Adversary is how it fits with all the other green 3-drops. We got a lot of good green 3-drops at the moment. We have Kazandu Mammoth, upside of being a land. We got Old Growth Troll, seeing playback to Historic and Pioneer and Stompy decks. We got Briarbridge Tracker, also a 4/3 for 3 that gives you a clue token. And then some decks might want to Scoot Swarm if you're playing Landfall synergies, or Augur of Autumn if you're going Ramp or Landfall, Circle of Dream Druid in an Elf Tribal deck. So there's a lot of competition for this slot, but honestly, I think that Primal Adversary can beat out some of these cards. I think if you're playing some sort of Stompy deck, Old Growth Throw is still really good. Kazandu Mammoth is still land, which makes it somewhat free rolly in your deck. But beyond that, I think Primal Adversary is going to find a home in these green aggro decks, in these multicolor decks, because it does something none of these other cards do, which is in the late game, if you get a lot of mana, it essentially just wins the game. Like, you cast this for 7 mana, 8 mana, 9 mana, and you just make an overwhelming board. So it's one of the best cards you can draw off the top of your deck in the late game. Once your opponent wraps your board or kills all your stuff, you draw a Kazandu Mammoth, and that's fine. It's a body, or an Old Growth Troll. That's fine. That's kind of 2 bodies if it dies. But Primal Adversary just adds so much immediate power to the battlefield that I expect this is going to see heavy play in Standard. Once you get outside of Standard, it gets a little bit more sketchy for 2 reasons. One is, outside of Standard, decks aren't as likely to get up to 7, 8, 9 mana. Like, the further back in Magic you go towards Modern and Pioneer, the faster games end usually. So in a mono-green Stompy deck, the upside of like, oh, if I fled out and get to 9 mana, this is going to make me a huge board, isn't as much of an upside, because it's just so unlikely your Pioneer or Modern deck is going to make it to 9 mana, and there's a lot of other competition. Once you get back to like Historic and Pioneer, you got Steel Leaf Champions, you got Ronas's, you got Yorvos, and these are more powerful than the Standard options, but I still think there's some chance, just because this at 5 mana is pretty good. Even if you discount the fact that you get to 9 mana and it wins you the game almost, even just at 5 mana where you cast this and get another body and grow it into a 5/4, like, that's a pretty reasonable creature. So I think that Primal Adversary, standard staple in green-based aggro decks, plus it's got Wolf synergies, which could be relevant, and it's got some chance to show up in green and Gruul-style aggro decks. Going back into older formats, especially like Historic and Pioneer, I think once you get to Modern, it loses some of its appeal, but I think it could show up in small numbers in those decks as well. Speaking of new wolves, oh boy, Tovolar's Huntmaster, the biggest werewolf we've seen yet, I think. 6 mana, 6/6. When it enters the battlefield, make 2 2/2 green wolf tokens. That's the daybound side. The nightbound side makes it so whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, you get 2 2/2 green wolf tokens, and you can pay for it to have another wolf or werewolf fight a creature you don't control, and it is a 7/7 on the backside. So Tovolar's Huntmaster, this card, it's essentially Grave Titan. It's very close to Grave Titan. At rare, of course, the Daybound side doesn't give you the tokens when it attacks. Only the Nightbound side does that. But still, you're going to get 10 power and toughness across 3 bodies when this comes into play, just like Grave Titan. And then if you manage to flip it around, it's actually bigger than Grave Titan, and you get the attacking wolves, and you have this fight ability, which seems relevant as well. This is a crazy card. I am actually, like, super scared of this card in Standard, especially in Limited. I have to imagine this is going to be an unbeatable bomb in Limited. Like, you just pick this first pick every single time, and I don't know how anyone ever beats this card. I don't think I've ever beat a Grave Titan in Limited. So I expect that Tovolar's Huntmaster are going to be the same way in Limited. Maybe we see some sort of, like, green token mid-range ramp deck. We got a Zika's Chariot, which is kind of like a mini Tovolar's Huntmaster, where you're getting 2/2 tokens and a 4/4 that you can crew and make tokens with. So maybe there's some mono green mid-range token style show would be interesting. And in some ways, Tovolar's Huntmaster is even better than Grave Titan because it's green, and green is the color of ramping. Like, in Standard, it's very possible to have a game where you turn 2, like, Tangled Floral Heater or Lotus Cobra, turn 3, Condrix Cultivator or Vastwood Surge, turn 4, Tovolar's Huntmaster, put 10 power on the battlefield, and that's legit. That is a really fast, scary start. So I actually really like this card. Then, of course, you also can play it in a dedicated Daybound Nightbound deck. I don't think you need to do that, though. Like, sure, you probably will play it in Tovolar or in Daybound Nightbound Arlen, but I don't think that is necessary to make Tovolar's Huntmaster good. I think you just ramp into it and cast it, and then maybe flip it sometimes and get a Grave Titan in Standard out of the deal that even has that fighting upside. So the card's kind of insane. I expect this to be a staple of Werewolf decks in formats like Commander. I expect it to be a pretty good threat in Standard as well. I mean, Grave Titan was a legit thing, and while this does take a little bit more work with the flipping to actually get the full Grave Titan effect, it is close enough that I'm actually kind of shocked that this is a rare. They could have put this card at Mythic, and I would not have blinked an eye. Like, it seems like a card that could be Mythic, and in Limited, I don't know. If anything, I'm afraid this card's going to be too good in Limited. I think this is the snappiest of first picks. We'll see. We haven't got to draft the format yet. Maybe it's not going to be as good as I think, but I would expect this to be like S-tier Limited first pick fodder. We also got a new Ormendahl and a new Black Mythic, Jerren Corrupted Bishop / Ormendahl the Corruptor. So the front side of Jerren, 3 mana 2/3 legendary human cleric. When it enters the battlefield or another non-token human you control dies, you lose 1 life and make a 1/1 white human creature token. You can pay 2 to give a human you control lifelink until end of turn. And at the beginning of your end step, if you have exactly 13 life, you can pay 6 and flip Jerren into Ormendahl the Corrupted, a 6/6 flying, trampling, lifelinking demon that lets you sack a creature to draw a card. Jerren, I think this card's actually really good. So on one hand, I don't know how often you're going to flip this into Ormendahl. I'm sure there's going to be times when it happens, but you need exactly 13 life, which is something we've seen with like Triskaidekaphobia not necessarily be that easy to pull off. Like Triskaidekaphobia has always been an against odds card. It's never really been a competitive card. So getting to a specific exact life total, that is a bit of a challenge for flipping. The good news is I don't think you need to flip this to be good. Oh yeah, you also got to pay 6 mana, which is a big cost to flip around. Like if you think about it, the Ormendahl side, a 6 mana 6/6 flying trample lifelink that lets you sack a creature, draw a card. That's fine. That's not a bad card, but it's also not like, oh my god, that's so busted. The thing I love about Jerren though is the front half is just like legit. It compares to things like Rotlung Reanimator or Xanthrid Necromancer, these 3-drop creatures that when a creature of a specific type dies, you get to make a token. And Jerren kind of does the same thing. The downside is it only makes 1/1s, but it has a bunch of upsides. It can give stuff lifelink, it makes a token when it comes into play, so technically you're getting a 4/3 for 3 if you add the token stats in with Jerren, so that's another upside. The biggest upside, though, is the token you make is a human. We've seen like Xanthrid Necromancer in the semi-distant past be a card that was played in modern 5-color humans. It's good removal protection, wrath protection. The downside is, when it dies, it's making a zombie, and that's great, but it's not as good as having it be a human. Jerren could be in the conversation for these human decks in older formats because it makes humans, which means if your opponent kills one of your humans, you're going to get a human token, which is going to trigger your Champion of the Parish and your Thalia's Lieutenant and benefit from all your synergies, which is a massive upgrade. And then there might be some times where it just happens to work out that, oh, I'm at 13 life and, you know, I could use a big flyer, and you flip it around. But I think you play this for the front side rather than with the goal being to flip into Ormendahl. As far as Standard is concerned, my only question is what color are humans going to be? Are humans going to be in black in Standard? If they are, Jerren is almost certainly going to be a key part of that deck. We do have some good black humans, like Graveyard Trespasser is a good standalone card, Silver Quill Silencer, Blood Sky Berserker, so there's some reasons to go into black in your human deck, and now Jerren, which is probably the biggest reason. At the same time, going into green offers a lot of options, Catildas and Sigardas and Brearbridge Trackers and Mints. Maybe you go full on like Abzan humans or 4-color humans if you can make the mana work. But that's my only question. Like, if humans are in black in Standard, Jerren is going to be a part of it. The card is really, really powerful. In older formats, humans tend to naturally be in black. Like, historic humans, pioneer humans, they're actually base white-black and then sometimes splashing into a 3rd color. So I think this is basically an auto-include in humans decks in those formats. In Modern, it's a little bit more sketchy. I think maybe as a 1-of, it could still be really good, but I don't expect it to be a 4-of in Modern. The back half, I mean, it's a powerful card. Although, again, I don't think you play this to flip into Ormendahl. I think that's a fringe upside. I think you play it because Jerren's good in your deck, and then every once in a while, it just works out. That you're at 13 life, and you got 6 extra mana, and you could use a big flying lifelinker. Compared to old Ormendahl, it's actually a lot less scary. Old Ormendahl also was indestructible, and also had haste, so it would come down and just like smack you for 9 and essentially win the game. A new Ormendahl, though, the upside of being able to sack a creature to draw a card is pretty huge. You might have a lot of human tokens floating around from your Jerren that you can immediately sacrifice, which is nice. And if you really do want to focus on flipping into Ormendahl, the fact that Jerren lets you lose life when a human dies and lets you give humans lifelink, that is a way you can manipulate it, although still it does cost 6 mana, so you're still paying Ormendahl's price. Once you get Ormendahl, though, it is a powerful effect. We've seen Yawgmoth, the ability to sack a creature to draw a card without any mana attached, be very, very powerful all the way back to Modern. There's Modern combo decks built around this ability. Not putting a -1/-1 counter on something, I guess, can be a drawback, although at the same time, you're not losing life, which is an upside, but it's certainly a powerful effect. I just don't know how often you're going to get to exactly 13 life. As I mentioned before, Triskaidekaphobia has never been a consistent win condition. It's always been a against the odds win condition. And even though Jerren does help, that's still asking for a lot to get to exactly 13 having 6 mana left over. So Jerren, I'm actually super hyped for this card. The front half is good enough that even if it didn't have the Ormendahl side, I would think this is a playable card in humans. And then you get the bonus that sometimes you're going to get an Ormendahl, and that's just going to straight up beat your opponent. Next on our list, we got another black mythic, a big old demon, Lord of the Forsaken, 6 mana, 6/6 flying trample. Pay a black, sack a creature, target player mills 3, pay a life, add a colorless mana, spend it only to cast spells from your graveyard. So Lord of the Forsaken, it's a massive demon that can stock your graveyard and then give you mana to cast cards from the graveyard. Essentially, once this is on a battlefield, it's a channel. Pay a life to add a colorless mana. That is straight up channel, a card that is banned and restricted across formats. Lets you cast Emeralds on turn 2 and cube refs. It's a busted card. Sure, it only works from the graveyard, but still, that is an ability to take notice of. As far as just its body is concerned, meh. Honestly, I'm a little bit skeptical that just a 6/6 flying trample is super exciting in standard anymore, because we've had like Rakdos, we've had Demon Lord Belzenlock, we had Doom Whisper, a 5/5 flying trample that also can fill your graveyard even more easily than Lord of the Forsaken, and none of these cards were standard staples, and some of them didn't even really see play outside of against the odds janky style decks. None of these cards were great, so I don't think just being a big flying trampler is enough to make you a standard staple in 2021. On the other hand, it's got a lot of really good abilities. Filling your graveyard is pretty relevant in a Golgari deck or even a mono black deck. You got Skyclave Shade, you got Even Death, you got Old Stick Fingers, and some of these cards offer some synergies. Like you can Skyclave Shade, sacrifice it to get more cards in your graveyard, and then get it back with its ability, maybe using Lord of the Forsaken to pay for some of its mana cost, pay for some of its kicker cost. So there is a lot of synergy here. Maybe there's some sort of Golgari, get stuff in and out of your graveyard deck. It goes further up in value if you can reanimate it. Reanimating it is the way to go with this card. If you can Diagraph Rebirth this into play on the cheap, that can allow for some explosive turns. Plus, we've been talking throughout spoiler season, what do you do with decay tokens? What do you do with decay cards? They're not like real creatures, but they're kind of real creatures. Well, one of the good things you can do with them is sack them to Lord of the Forsaken to fill your graveyard with a bunch of flashback spells, reanimation targets, and then proceed to win the game. We also have good things to cast from our graveyard. Imagine getting this out alongside Liar in a graveyard full of instants and sorceries. You're going to have a really good turn. We got natural flashback cards. Memory Deluge is a card that's getting some hype in standard. Like with Lord of the Forsaken, you can pay 5 life in 2 mana to flash it back and dig 7 cards deep. That seems kind of insane. And then in older formats, you can just go full on combo mode. Like as we talked about before, Channel is a busted magic card. And even though this has the restriction of only being from your graveyard, there's certainly situations where you can play Lord of the Forsaken, spend essentially your entire life and flashback a Devil's Play for lethal on your opponent, or Aftermath a Ribbons at your opponent. So there's shenanigans here, combo shenanigans, where one spell from your graveyard can win the game. Plus, if you want to just go big, we got Yawgwills and Underworld Breaches and Past in Flames, other cards that let you just recast your whole graveyard, so there's combo potential here as well. As far as Commander is concerned, I think this is a new staple for decks decks that want to cast things from their graveyard, like Muldrotha, Kess, Chainer. These are all commanders that want to be casting things from their graveyard repeatedly. And Commander, you got 40 life. Lord of the Forsaken can fill your graveyard, even if you're not built around it. You can sack creatures in response to a removal spell, let's say, to fill your graveyard for your commander. And then if you have Lord of the Forsaken and your commander out, good lord, can you do some explosive things. You're going to be able to cast anything you want with Muldrotha every turn, with the mana Lord of the Forsaken provides. So this card, really frightening. It's got a big body. I don't think that's enough to make it a standard staple on its own, but it's also got some really scary abilities. I think there's some standard potential in the right deck, especially one of those Golgari Graveyard style decks or Reanimator style decks, where this could be one of your big payoffs and one of your best enablers. Commander potential as well. Really sweet new demon. We also got Pappy McPoyle, probably better known as Malevolent Hermit, another Disturb card. So 2 mana, 2/1, human wizard, pay a blue, sack it, counter a non-creature spell, unless its controller pays 3, disturbed of 3 mana, and you get a Benevolent Geist, which is a 2/2 flyer for 2 that says non-creature spells you control can't be countered, and then if it goes to the graveyard from anywhere, you gotta exile it so you can't keep looping it. Malevolent Hermit, I'm not sure what to make of this card. On one hand, I could see this showing up in some sort of like Azorius Tempo style deck, where sure, it's a counter that your opponent can definitely see coming, but if it's sitting out and you leave a mana up, it's going to be hard for your opponent to like cast a Doomscar and blow up your board or whatever. It also has some interesting potential with the back half. The back half seems at its best in control decks, and that could be the other home for this card. You play it in your control deck, knowing it's a kind of medium counter that sits out on the battlefield, but then you get it back as Benevolent Geist, and your non-creature spells can't be countered. It's kind of like a hybrid of Void Mage Prodigy and Sphinx of the Final Word, a mini Sphinx of the Final Word, but still, it's very similar to those cards. Malevolent Hermit, downsides compared to Void Mage Prodigy is, well, it only hits non-creature spells, but it is cheaper to activate. And then the backside, it's only a 2/2, which is a concern, but it does protect your instants and sorceries along with other non-creature spells, just like Sphinx of the Final Word. My only concern is the backside, it is pretty fragile. So if your goal is to use this to force through your big spells, your opponent can just like frostbite it, let's say, and then proceed to interact with your spells, do whatever they want to do, counter your spells. But still, I could imagine this being a card that you play in a control deck, where the idea is you counter something early, and then you wait for your big turn. You wait to the turn where you want to play your Teferi, or you want to play your Narset, and then you disturb your Benevolent Geist. If your opponent counters it, well, then they ate up some of their mana countering that. Hopefully you can resolve your big payoff. If they don't counter it, well, then they're not going to be able to counter your big payoff, assuming it's a non-creature spell. So Malevolent Hermit, I don't think it's a busted card by any means, but I could see a role for it in some sort of tempo deck, or as tech in the control mirror, where you counter something and then make your stuff uncounterable and prepare for that big turn to force your finisher through. We also got perhaps the best white removal spell that Wizards has printed in a standard set in years. We've been asking for better white removal, specifically for Historic, but really, white just needs better removal, period. Since the days of Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile, white's removal has gotten really bad. Well, Fateful Absence is a really good card. 2 mana instant. Destroy a creature or a planeswalker its controller investigates. So kill any creature or planeswalker for 2 mana at instant speed. Your opponent gets a clue, but that's totally worth it. This calls back a little bit to Declaration in Stone, except I think Fateful Absence is just way better. Deck in Stone, sorcery speed, it only gets creatures, it does exile, and you get the upside of getting each creature with the same name. On the other hand, I would much rather have an instant, which is relevant in a lot of formats, and the upside of hitting planeswalkers than the fringe upside of maybe hitting multiple creatures. We've been lauding Infernal Grasp is like the best black removal spell, the best Doomblade at least, that Wizards has printed in a long time. And Infernal Grasp, it does deserve the praise it gets. It's a really good card, but Fateful Absence, it's in the conversation, not for like best removal spell of all time, but certainly best white removal spell printed in a standard set in a number of years. This is actually a legitimately good card. I think it's going to be a staple of standard decks. It's not on the level of Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares, but when you compare it to Declaration in Stone, it's an upgrade. When you compare it to Divine Gambit and other wonderful white removal spells Wizards has given us recently, it's like a million times better. So this is a legit card, and I think the upside of being able to hit Planeswalkers is really, really massive. There's been some debate, like, oh, in Historic, would I rather have Deck and Stone or Fateful Absence? Well, Deck and Stone, it's really, in a lot of cases, more of a sideboard card, because Control is really popular in formats like Historic. Deck and Stone, it's just a dead card. You run into the Teferi deck, and it's a dead card, so you can't really afford to put it into your main deck most of the time. Fateful Absence, you certainly can. If you run into a creature deck, it's great. You kill any creature for 2 mana. If you run into a control deck, it's still great. You kill Teferi or Narset or whatever for 2 mana. Plus, the instant speed upside. We're in a world where Questing Beasts and other hasty threats, Arclight Phoenixes, are running around. So being able to hit a hasty threat at instant speed is another huge upside compared to Declaration in Stone. I think this is foundational removal in Standard. Like, this with Skyclave Apparition and a bunch of other white cards, that's a really solid removal package backed by some really solid threats. So I think we'll see white aggro or white X aggro be pretty legitimate in Standard, and I think the same foundation is what you build off of in formats like Historic. Like Fateful Absence, Skyclave Apparition, fill your deck with a bunch of other stuff, and you were good to go with a really solid removal package. Not as hyped in Modern. It could be a budget option for Modern, but we just got Prismatic Ending, and Prismatic Ending, kind of insane removal. Plus, once you get back to older formats like Modern, Path to Exile is running around, and that's a really good card. So I don't think this makes it all the way back to Modern, but certainly Standard, staple removal, best white removal spell in the format, move over to Buying Gambit. Historic, I think, move over Declaration in Stone. Also potential in like Pioneer, where this could be part of White's removal suite. So a really, really solid card that I think people are sleeping on. Like, this is about as good of removal that White has gotten in a Standard legal set in many, many years. We also got one of my least favorite cards from the set. Actually, my single least favorite card from the set. Hallowed Respite, 2 mana Azorius sorcery. Exile target non-legendary creature, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. If it entered under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Otherwise, tap it. So Hallowed Respite is the kind of card that I love. I love Ephemerates. I love blinking creatures with Panharmonicons out and those kind of shenanigans. The problem is Hallowed Respite is a sorcery, which just massively limits its potential. I guess you can use it to get a blocker out of the way and limited, and I don't know. This card is just really not good, and doubly so when you compare it to Momentary Blink. Momentary Blink, a common from Time Spiral that lets you just, for 2 mana, blink one of your things and put it back into play. For 4 mana, flash it back and do the same thing. You compare Hallowed Respite to that, and it is just a horrible, horrible rare. It's just not a good Magic card. I don't think this card has any potential at all in any format. The only thing I can think is Wizards wants to be careful with flashback spells that can be used aggressively. We saw in original Innistrad travel preparations be one of the best things in Limited, and I think Wizards wants to be very careful about accidentally having an upgraded travel preparations in Limited or something. So we've seen all of the flashback spells that can potentially be combat blowouts, Angel Fire Ignitions and Croaking Counterparts and Winter Blessing and Dire Strain Rampage. They're all sorceries. They're all designed in a way where you're not going to be able to blow your opponent out in combat. Maybe that's a good thing for the sake of Limited, but it's certainly a bad thing for the sake of Constructed, and I cannot picture myself playing this card, even though I love Blink effects. They're some of my favorite cards to play. I just can't picture myself playing this card in any format. I think it is stone unplayable from Limited all the way back to Vintage and back to Commander. It's if it was an instant, it would be really good, but as a sorcery, there's just not any reason to play it. We also got a pretty neat red transform card, Smoldering Egg / Ashmouth Dragon. So front side, a 2 mana 0/4 defender. When you cast an instant sorcery spell, put a number of ember counters on Smoldering Egg equal to the amount of mana spent to cast the spell. Then if it has 7 or more counters, flip it around into Ashmouth Dragon, a 4/4 flying dragon that whenever you cast an instant sorcery spell, deals 2 damage to any target. I think this card, it looks janky. It looks like, oh, you know, it's a cute little egg. We've seen dragon's eggs in the past. They're not really good. They're usually just like janky limited cards. This is Thing in the Ice. This is the return of Thing in the Ice. The upside is it's even easier to flip, I think, because it counts the amount of mana you spent on a spell rather than the number of spells. Thing in the Ice, it takes 4 instants and sorceries. Smoldering Egg, a lot of times you're going to be able to do it with less than 4 instants and sorceries. The downside is Awoken Horror. That's a 7/8. That's a really big body. Ashmouth Dragon, it's only a 4/4, but it does have flying, and it has a really scary ability. If you're trying to flip a Smoldering Egg, you're playing a lot of spells in your deck, so once you get Ashmouth Dragon, all of those spells are coming with the kicker of being a shock, sending 2 damage, not just to your opponent, at anything. So you're going to wipe out your opponent's board, deal a bunch of damage to your opponent's face. This interacts really well with flashback spells. It's pretty easy with Galvanic Iteration or Memory Deluge to flip this at lightning speed. Like Memory Deluge, the flashback is 7 mana. Like you can flip a Smoldering Egg. You play this Memory Deluge with flashback, that's enough to flip it all by itself. So the fact that it counts the mana you spend on these spells makes it really easy. Like Galvanic Iteration, flashback Galvanic Iteration, that's 5 counters. Basically any other spell in Standard is going to get the job done. So it seems incredibly easy to flip, and then you get a big payoff out of it. If you go back to older formats, you got stuff like Manamorphose. You don't need to be playing big spells. You got Lightning Bolts. It is going to take a while to add up 7 Lightning Bolts and flip it, much more than Thing in the Ice, which might make this more like the standard or historic version of Thing in the Ice, rather than real competition for Thing in the Ice in Modern. But still, it's relatively easy to flip around. Once you get it flipped around, it's a powerful creature. There's not really a super close comparison. We got Rockside Sorcerer, which is a little bit similar, but it's got less power. It doesn't have flying. It only deals 1 damage. Like this dragon that deals 2 damage to anything in the decks that are going to be playing it is a legit threat. It's big enough to fight with things like Goldspan Dragon and Moonveil Regent and Galazeth Prismari. It could even show up in those decks. Like you just play it in the early game or out of the sideboard, bring it in against aggro, where a 0/4 is a good blocker, and then eventually flip it around into this huge dragon. I think that is maybe the main home for this card. I think you could build around it, and that's a possibility. I think worst case floor of this card, sideboard control card for like Izzet Dragons or Jeskai control in Historic, and you bring it in against aggro, block your opponent's stuff, eventually flip it with expressive iterations, anger the gods, and then just shoot down your opponent's stuff for the rest of the game with this huge dragon. It also could have some Memekin potential. Memekin, one of my favorite jank decks in Historic, where you're just trying to like run away Steamkin and Burgee and chain together cheap spells and ping your opponent out of the game with Electrostatic Field and Thermal Alchemist. And while Smoldering Egg takes longer to get going because it's going to start off as a 0/4, once it flips around, it's way better than Electrostatic Field, way better than Thermal Alchemist, not just because it deals more damage, but because it can shoot creatures as well, which is a huge upside. So I actually think Smoldering Egg is a legit card. It looks weird because we've seen Dragon Eggs in the past not really be constructed playable, but the comparison to Thing in the Ice I think is a good one, and I would not be at all surprised to see Smoldering Egg legitimately playable in Standard and probably like Historic and maybe Pioneer as well. We also got a new Commander exclusive. So just so it's 1,000,000% clear, Lynde Cheerful Tormentor is not legal in Standard. This is a card that's showing up in set boosters and collector boosters. Legal in Commander, and I think back to Legacy, like kind of like a Commander precon card essentially, except showing up in set boosters and collector boosters rather than a precon. But this is a really sweet card. Lynde Cheerful Tormentor is the cursed commander we've all been waiting for. 4 mana Grixis Legendary Human Warlock. You get a 2/4 with Death Touch. This says whenever a curse is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, return it to the battlefield attached to you at the beginning of your next end step. That sounds bad, but the next line of text, at the beginning of your upkeep, you may attach a curse that's attached to you to one of your opponents if you do draw 2 cards. So Lynde is exactly what we want for a curse commander. The only downside is it doesn't work with Overwhelming Splendor. I think that's the one curse that's in the wrong color for Lynde in Commander, but you get all the other sweet curses. You get Curse of Misfortunes and Maddening Hex and Cruel Realities and Curse of Fool Wisdom. Like, if we're gonna have a 3-color curse commander, Grixis is the color to have it be in. The other thing about this card is it solves Curse's biggest problem in Commander by a huge amount. So the problem with playing curses in Commander is curses enchant a single player. So what happens is you play a bunch of curses, you put them all on Tomer. Eventually, because Tomer's got a lot of curses on him, he ends up dying, and then you just lose your curses. The thing they were attached to died. They all go to your graveyard, and you kind of don't have your curses anymore. Lynde gets around that problem. Lynde, you can curse one of your opponents, and once that opponent dies, the first ability is going to put those curses back into play. After the opponent dies, they're going to go to the graveyard, they're going to come back into play, and then you get to reattach those curses and draw cards along the way to someone else. So this greatly powers up the curse archetype that really hasn't had a great commander to lead it. This does exactly what you want a curse commander to do. The other interesting thing about Lynde is that last ability, yes, it works with your curses coming back from the graveyard. It also works with just curses that you cast. I think if you're playing Lynde, the default mode is probably going to be to cast your curses attached to yourself and then move those curses to your opponent, because you're going to draw 2 cards whenever you do that, which is a very powerful effect. That's a steady source of card advantage. So Lynde, outside of Curse Tribal in Commander, doesn't really have any potential, but in Curse Tribal Commander, this is the dream commander. If you're a Curse fan, this is the commander you've been waiting for. So even though I'm not a big fan of cards being released only in set and collector boosters, I'll give it a pass on this one, because Lynde is just such a spectacular card. Finally today, in the world of lower rarity cards, not going to spend too much time here because we just got the full set. Check it out, mtgpreviews.com. You can see the whole set. There's a ton of lower rarity stuff that got dumped, but I did want to mention Cathartic Pyre, because I think this card's pretty legit. 2 mana instant, choose 1, 3 damage to a creature or planeswalker, or discard up to 2 cards and draw that many cards. This is kind of a replacement for Fire Prophecy, which is proven to be a pretty strong standard card, and I can see an argument that Cathartic Pyre is even better. If you think about what this is, it's kind of a tormenting voice attached with an Abrade style removal spell, and this flexibility is really huge. It means in the early game you can kill your opponent's creatures, and in the late game when maybe there's no little creatures to kill, it's always going to be live because you can Faithless Looting away a couple of dead cards and try to find some action. So I really love the flexibility of this card. I think at a minimum it's going to see standard play. I think it's a good standard removal spell, and in Arclight Phoenix style decks, other decks that are really interested in a Faithless Looting effect, I could see this maybe having some potential in older formats too. Anyway, that brings us to the end of not just our daily Innistrad Midnight Hunt spoilers for today, but our main set spoilers for this set overall. So we do have one more day of spoilers on Monday where we get the Commander precons. I'll be back with a video for that on the MTGGoldfish Commander YouTube channel, but don't worry, even though we're at the end of spoiler season, we're not done with Innistrad Midnight Hunt. We're going to have top 10 videos talking about what cards can work in various formats. We're going to have EV breakdowns. We're going to have tons of gameplay. Once the set finally comes out in another week or so on Arena, we'll have streams and against odds and much a brew. So keep an eye out for all that to see all these sweet new cards in action. And let me know, now that we've seen the full set, what do you think? What are you most hyped for? How good is this set? What's standard going to look like? What do you want to build first in standard, historic, modern, pioneer, commander? Let me know in the comments. Thanks so much for watching, and thanks for hanging out this spoiler season. So even though we're done for now, don't worry. More Commander spoilers on Monday, and then we got another set coming. Unique thing about this Innistrad release is we're going to have spoiler season in like another month for Innistrad Crimson Vow. So the Innistrad fun's not over yet. We're just on break to get to play with the new cards for a little bit before more spoilers. So thanks so much for watching, everyone. Seriously, you're amazing. I appreciate you all so much. Have a wonderful day, and I'll be back Monday with some Innistrad Midnight Hunt Commander precon spoilers. So until then, have a great weekend, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.